Katherine Stueland. She spent her career at companies creating life-saving medical breakthroughs, from the first HIV/AIDS treatment to cancer therapies. Today, she runs GeneDX, a leader in genomic testing. It's identified over 400 new disease gene relationships, and it reached profitability under Stueland's leadership last year. She's now focusing on identifying rare diseases among children and newborns. Katherine Stueland is in the Changemakers and Power Players spotlight. Katherine Stueland, CEO of GeneDX. 2024 was a huge year for GeneDX. New innovations in genomic sequencing, accelerating diagnosis and expanding into all sorts of new areas, including pediatric and newborn screening. What was behind all of the accelerations and achievements in the past year, 18 months?
Well, GeneDX has actually been around for 25 years and has been a pioneer in diagnosing the hardest to diagnose patients. And oftentimes, these are children. 1 in 10 Americans has a rare disease. Half of them are children. So it's actually much more common than what people might think. In the past several years, I joined in 2021. The goal was to grow the company's business, really try to reduce the amount of time that it takes for a child with a rare disease to be given an accurate diagnosis, and also to ensure that we could continue to scale the business to meet the growing needs and do so in a way that drove profitability so we could continue to reinvest.
And through all this 56% increase in revenue last year, you talk about focus. What were your strategies to achieve all of that and increase revenue?
You know, it's interesting. The diagnostics industry has some unique opportunities and some unique challenges. You don't get paid 100% of the time for your services, which might sound kind of odd, especially when you think about general consumer goods. But in diagnostics, the best in class is to get paid maybe 70 or 80% of the time. And so we're in a challenging position where we're trying to make sure that we can open up access for more and more patients. And we have to work with providers and with insurance companies to ensure that there's good coverage for it, that a lack of insurance never serves as a barrier, that more state-by-state Medicaid contracts cover it, and then to actually pull through and ensure that we can get paid for our services. And so while we put a real focus on growing in areas like epilepsy, autism, developmental delay, missed milestones, we focused on those areas because there's good reimbursement coverage. And so we made it really clear to our team and to our investors that we were going to focus on areas where there was a dire unmet need. We have a better clinical test that's more accurate in being able to diagnose disease for these families. And importantly, there was also really a clear path for us to get paid for those services. So the growth in revenue really was driven by a healthy balance of opening up access with volume, but also making sure that we were focused in areas where we could get paid for that volume.
Yeah, that key combination. Now, GeneDX is a leader in genomic testing, but how do you see GeneDX shaping the future of personalized medicine, which there's so much conversation about now?
You know, it's interesting. We want to get to a place where we can prevent disease progression. And part of that means an earlier diagnosis. Right now, the healthcare system today, we're waiting for people to get sick. And unfortunately, in the case of rare diseases, it takes on average 5 years for a child with a rare disease to get an accurate diagnosis. And when we say 5 years in the context of a child, that means a 2-year-old has disease progression and not an accurate diagnosis until they're 7 years old, which is unconscionable, given the fact that today we can do it in 3 weeks. In the NICU, we can actually do it in 48 hours. Ultimately, when we get to a place where we can screen every baby at birth, we want to be in a position where we can intervene as early as possible to connect them based on their genetic diagnosis with the specific therapy that might be individualized for them, or another medical intervention.
You talk about early diagnosis, but also equitable access. What's it going to take to get there? Is it about bringing down the cost? Is it just about scale? What's the future hold?
So bringing down the cost is key to access 100%. And it's part of our commitment as we think about the strategy that frankly predated me, the company was investing in state-by-state Medicaid populations before there was any Medicaid policy. And what that ensured was that we had a really diverse group of patients that we were able to diagnose. The ability to then take the data that we were able to gather and go to these state-by-state Medicaid agencies and say you should be covering testing has ensured that today we have 35 states that cover it in the outpatient setting, and we're now up to 16 states that cover NICU testing. And so equitable access comes down to our ability to lower cost. It also was the product of our willingness to invest in these patient populations ahead of our ability to get paid. And ultimately what that means is we have the most diverse genetic database in the United States.
And all that data can be unlocked by AI. Explain how you're leveraging AI right now and can continue to leverage these new AI technologies as they emerge to make GeneDX more powerful.
There's really three aspects to how we think about AI. One is what I think every company is attempting to really realize, which is business operations at scale. For us, though, that also means how do we ensure that we can gather as much information from the patient in terms of their EMR data in order to ensure that there's a higher likelihood that that test is going to get covered by an insurance company. So the business operations is one layer of how we're deploying AI today. Our data asset is incredibly vast and it's robust. So there's one part that is all about genotypic information. So we've run more than 800,000 exomes and genomes. It's the largest rare disease data set in the United States. And all of them enriched for rare disease. We've also tested mom and dad 60% of the time. And as I said, really have a diversity enriched population. But we're pairing that with phenotypic information. So when I say phenotypic, it means information about family history, about symptoms, about misdiagnoses. Oftentimes there's on average 3 misdiagnoses for these patients. So it's contextual data that helps us really look at the genotypic information and be able to provide an accurate diagnosis. Now we have done that historically manually. So we're looking up all of these variants across 20,000 genes. What we've been able to do is develop a technology that really helps scrape through all of that data, and for our clinical geneticist who works on our team, where now AI is serving up what the most likely answer is, and it enables them to be able to make the definitive call. So what we're doing is really deploying AI and being able to empower the human on the other end of it, which is a critically important part in ensuring that we are delivering what is life-changing information for many of these families.
Amazing how powerful AI can be. Before we move on to your history, I have to ask about the conversation about federal funding cuts to healthcare and also research programs. How do you see that impacting your business?
You know, I like to remind people, as a company that was born at the NIH, we're the picture-perfect example of what really good government-funded science and technology can look like in a profitable way that is now paying itself forward to more families, to our employees, and to our shareholders. You know, the cuts at NIH don't directly impact us in that we're not reliant on it for our business today. However, the cuts at NIH do mean that somebody else is going to have to offset the research and the innovation that has been really an important part of how we've been able to make progress since the Human Genome Project was finished. As we think, though, beyond NIH at Medicaid, for example, I've spent a lot of time over the past several months with policymakers and over the past several years with state policymakers. And part of what's unique about our story, we're delivering better clinical outcomes and we're actually saving the healthcare system dollars. So when you think about rare disease, there's $1 trillion economic impact in the United States for rare disease alone. A significant portion of that is because we're not diagnosing disease, but we're still paying for the treatment of symptoms. We're still paying for hospitalizations. And so we've been able to generate really important health economic data that shows you're paying for these diseases without a diagnosis. By diagnosing sooner, you're actually saving the healthcare system important dollars.
Yeah, it seems like something we should all be able to agree on. You've had such an immense impact at GeneDX, and there seems like there's even more potential ahead. But I want to go back to how you came to lead this company. Your background is not in medicine, but you started raising money for cystic fibrosis when you were only 11 years old. What happened back when you were 11, and how did we get from there to here?
You know, at age 11, I discovered that we had family members who had cystic fibrosis, and one of them had died, and I had the opportunity to meet her younger brother. And I was curious about why it was that some people in the family had a genetic disease and why others didn't. And I felt really compelled that we should be raising awareness of it and raised money through a neighborhood raffle to be able to donate to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. And I think that really instilled in me the sense of purpose and the sense of contribution on a very human issue that impacted our family. And as it turns out, it impacts 1 in 10 families today.
Wow. And so how did you go from there, though, to where you are here? Because you didn't study biomedical research or gene editing in college.
I did not, but my career journey has been atypical. I think the background that my family had in having been impacted by a rare disease gave me the sense of purpose. But then my background in English literature and communications, the pairing of those two really kind of naturally made way to life science communications. How do you bring together researchers, clinicians, patient advocates, investors to have a conversation about a problem that needs to be solved and breakthrough science? And that has been a really beautiful opportunity for many, many years in my career. And after demonstrating that you can create shareholder value through communications, I decided to jump into the deep end and take on an operating role. So when I got a call to explore the job at GeneDX, I found myself really feeling very confident in my ability that I could lead the company, open up more access, drive a scale strategy, make a company profitable so we can continue to reinvest for more and more patients.
But going back, though, so long before you decided to say yes to the GeneDX role, you studied English literature, you went into communications. What was that moment when you realized that you could bring your expertise in communications to have an impact in this sector that you cared about so deeply?
You know, it was a bit of a leap of faith by my first employer and by me. I stepped in and was working on the first protease inhibitor to be approved by the FDA. Before it received FDA approval, its pivotal phase 3 data came out, and I was given the opportunity to share that information with reporters like you. The reporters that I was talking to, though, had a different background. They were patient advocates. And so their job was to disseminate that information. And the gentleman who I spoke with actually was a patient in that clinical trial. And I went home that night just feeling the sense of real purpose and pride in being able to deliver information that really was life-changing.
We've talked to so many leaders who've had a nonlinear role, who didn't always stay on exactly the same path. And many of them have told us that it's their time in different sectors, different industries, having totally different experiences that in ways are the most impactful for their jobs now, running their companies. How do you think you've benefited from your background in communications, from not having a background in the kind of science that you're leading a company that's doing that kind of science right now?
You know, I think that the ability to get a group of really smart people who have a common purpose and a common passion for a mission together, get them seated at a table and really encourage them to open up and to challenge the way that we're solving problems, that's been a key to my success as a leader. I think, interestingly, for those of us who lead in the healthcare industry, we're constantly reminded by the patients that we serve of their own leadership. And I think that as we all reflect on moments when we've had a health scare, or a loved one's had a health scare. You have a moment of vulnerability and you realize that you have a lot more courage. And being able to encourage people to open up, challenge the status quo, really get to the heart of a problem, that's been key to our success as a company, our success as a leadership team. And ultimately, it all comes down to what is right for the patient population that we're aiming to serve. We always put it through that lens of the human impact. And also really challenge one another on how do we make sure that we're making a good business out of it. It's my belief that ultimately our ability to be a profitable and thriving company is going to be better off for more families moving forward.
You know, it's essential to talk about communication in any industry. And there are many leaders who don't have a background in communications who find themselves in a position where it's essential. What would your advice be to maybe people earlier in their careers who are trying to figure out how to build that communication muscle to make sure that when they're in a position of leading lots of different constituencies of people and bringing people together, they know how to do that?
Listening is key to all of that. If you want to be an effective communicator, it all starts with listening, being curious, asking really good questions, and really taking the time to prepare. I think the ability to prepare and to be thoughtful about what it is that you want to communicate is all going to be informed by that process of listening, of asking good questions, of seeking advice.
And for you, when you took on that GeneDX CEO role, did you hesitate? Did you have questions about whether or not it was the right move for you?
I felt really clear before I got the call that I had no interest in being a CEO, which I realize is probably atypical for many people. I hear people who were born to be a CEO. I felt really clear about the fact that I was a great right-hand person. And I think that might be true for a lot of women. And so when I did get the call, I did say yes, because I was curious. I knew that GeneDX had the best technology in the industry. And I believed that part of what my contributions had been to my prior company were about how do we change the conversation, drive growth, challenge the status quo, and what might be possible. So I said yes, I got curious, and as I started exploring it, I realized very quickly, very early on, that I actually knew everything that I needed to know in order to do the job.
So you thought of yourself as the number 2, and then you realized you could be number 1. What made you realize that? Was there a moment where you were like, yeah, you know what, I am a CEO?
I walked into a boardroom with the prior owners of the company, and as soon as I started talking, I felt like I came to life in a different way than I hadn't felt before. And so it was in that moment when I was being asked questions about what I would do with the company. Ironically, the first question they asked was, do you think you can make the company profitable? And I said yes. And so when we achieved profitability last year, it was a moment of great pride for me because I hadn't done it before. In fact, I had worked for companies that failed to do that.
And also this idea that in the interview was when you got over your imposter syndrome, or I assume, and had you suffered from imposter syndrome in the past, and what were your tricks to cope with it or get over it?
You know, as I look back at my 20s and my 30s, and I'm turning 50 this year, so as I'm reflecting on the past few decades in my career, I can remember so many moments where I was sitting in the meeting thinking about the perfect thing to say and not feeling like I had crafted exactly the right words, the right sequence of words to make a compelling argument. And then somebody else inevitably would say it, and I would walk away just feeling like I missed some opportunity and feeling really deflated. And as I look back, I also can think of many moments where I was stepping into a different role. And I can really look back at every career move that I've made where somebody said to me, are you sure you can do it? And I didn't feel it inside, but I would always say, yes, of course I can. And so as I'm reflecting back, I think the imposter syndrome was absolutely real. But at some point I got to a place, and I think it might have been in that interview, where all of a sudden I was like, I've known all of the right answers all along. And so that was a breakthrough for me.
So what's your advice to younger people, maybe women, who are sick of suffering from imposter syndrome and want to get to that point faster or with more clarity?
You know, I think there's two sides of this. One is, what is it that women can do? And the other side is, what is it that management teams and companies and teams can do to open up the right culture and the right framework for anyone to be able to really voice what they have to say and to develop. So when I think about what management teams can do, we should take a look at mentorship. We should take a look at really ensuring that we're hiring a diverse group of people, and that we're always looking for an opportunity for women to step into roles that are leadership roles. And then conversely, I think what women can do is to seek out the mentorship and to also really take a look at, are you prepared enough? Because I know in my experience, I kept waiting for the perfect moment, and there is no such thing as the perfect moment. And so step into the deep end and give yourself that chance. But both things have to happen to become true. We have to create the opportunities. You need somebody who's going to take a chance on you.
I want to hear a little bit more about you as a leader, because you've mentioned authenticity and vulnerability, but also confidence. And that balance between vulnerability and confidence and having it be authentic is so essential for strong leadership. How do you demonstrate your vulnerability and authenticity to your employees?
You know, I tend to share a lot about my own journey in terms of what, you know, if it is my family history with cystic fibrosis, if it is my family history with my dad having Alzheimer's disease and not having been diagnosed early enough. So I tend to share a lot about our own health journeys. I tend to share a lot about my own career journeys. And so I think approachability is an important part of this. I want, whether it is an employee or a clinician or a patient advocate, I want to make them feel comfortable. I want them to feel like they can open up and share. So I tend to step into vulnerability, but you know, as I mentioned earlier, the patients who we are constantly reminded of, they are in these deep moments of vulnerability. And I think what people also have seen in me is making courageous decisions. And that's the flip side of vulnerability, is you have these opportunities to really open up, to listen, to be a thoughtful, empathetic leader. But there also comes a time where I've had to make really hard decisions. And so when I think about my leadership style, it is, you know, kind of this blend of how do you make sure that you can have authentic, real conversations? Because when you're making really hard decisions, you can't do it alone. I have the humility to be able to say to a team of people, I don't know the right answer. I haven't made up my mind yet. And to encourage a dialogue and to challenge one another to really get to the truth behind what is causing a certain problem. And then to be able to listen to all of them and have the courage to say, based on everything that I know, everything that I've heard, and the totality of evidence, I now know how to make the courageous step forward for the company.
Was there a mistake or a misstep or some huge error you made that's impacted you and you've learned from meaningfully?
Not listening to my gut is probably one of the things that I would always encourage people, any leader, to do. And I feel like women uniquely also have that instinctiveness. And so we talk a lot about data-driven decisions, but if there's something that is nagging me, I have learned by ignoring that feeling in the past, I've learned that I have to listen to it.
So walk us through that. So your prior company was giving guidance and...
Yeah, so I worked for a drug developer a long time ago, and we were about to issue guidance. And somebody on the team had a question about, should we change the range of guidance? And I had this gut feeling that told me maybe we shouldn't give guidance. And I ignored that feeling. And that was a disaster for the company. And so when I think about some of the biggest lessons, I'll never forget that nagging feeling that I had that turned into kind of a sick feeling walking out of a meeting.
Got to listen to your spidey sense.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot. So I want to hear a little bit about your life hacks. You're running this big business. I'm sure you have crazy hours. How do you get through these busy days and make sure you stay energized and not burnt out?
There's a few things that I do. I am very committed, like so many, to exercise. So I prioritize that. I book my travel schedule around it. I make sure that I can always fit it in, except in the morning when I'm like, I actually need an extra hour of sleep. And so I give myself the grace for that. But I would say one of the most important life hacks that I've had, as basic as this sounds, is meditation and breathing. And you know, I typically talk about breath work because it's so much more accessible. It's free. It's always available to us. And if I am taking 5 minutes in between meetings, if I'm walking from one building to another building, I take the moment to really be intentional about taking 4 counts in, holding my breath for 4, 6 counts out, holding it for 2. What I found is that actually brings me like some clarity. It helps bring my energy level to a calmer place. And so that's been something that has been a hack for me over the past year or so.
And you trained as a yoga instructor.
I did. So the yoga breathing is incredibly helpful. I was also a dancer. So it's an interesting duality because there's that drive for perfection and then that approach where you're trying to be very forgiving and stay in the moment. So it's 2 parts of me that that keep the full Katherine very balanced.
And so when you taught yoga at your former company, I thought that was so funny to hear that you brought your skills as a yoga instructor into your workplace. What made you decide to do that? And what did that say about your willingness to really show up and who you are at work?
You know, the decision to even do yoga teacher training was a realization that I was working too much and that I needed something outside of my relentless drive. And so it helped me create some space and some calmness and some lightness and connection that really changed me. And so I think the decision to teach was also one of those other vulnerable moments of letting people that I work with see a different side of me. And I was really grateful that anyone showed up for it.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to get some sort of words of wisdom and the advice that you wish that you had known when you were younger. Your leadership style has clearly evolved over time. And you talked about this sort of late onset confidence of knowing you didn't have to have any imposter syndrome. But is there something you know now that you wish you had known then that you think the younger people should know as they try to advance in their careers?
You know, I think when people are more aware of their imposter syndrome, as they're more aware of the moments when they're having that self-doubt, I think those are awesome moments to be able to really check in. But it takes awareness and it takes conversation with others to actually feel really comfortable. So when I think about my younger self, I would tell myself not to waste any more time spending about the self-doubt and just to have the courage and to be decisive and to believe. Don't waste time in that spin cycle. Go talk to somebody, check your assumptions and go for it. There's no reason that you should hold yourself back.
That is a perfect note to end on. Katherine Stueland, thank you so much for joining us, CEO of GeneDX.
Thank you so much.